See if I can get all this back to normal. Welcome back to the Stampede Blue Colts Cast. That's what it's called. Thank you guys for coming back to the show. Matt Danely back from vacation. Thank you guys for being patient, continuing to go to Stampede Blue and checking out all the great work from everybody there. Zach Hicks is joining me tonight. We've got a couple different topics we're going to talk about with you guys. Going to get back into it. Colts started OTAs today. We'll just start with some of the newsy type stuff. OTAs kind of started today, second phase of the offseason, as Frank Reich likes to say. Some interesting news and notes, nothing major. I mean, it is OTAs, Zach, so we're not getting into, any definitives or anything like that. But obviously people are loving what they see out of Paris Campbell. There's a lot of things that, Stephen Holder was tweeting. We kind of talked about this just before we went live. And he was liking what he's seeing out of Justin Houston. A lot of people are seeing a lot of great things. One of the things that stood out to me in terms of what Frank Reich had to say in his presser today was that of Mo Alley-Cox, talking about the tight end room. Now, this to me is kind of something, and I kind of find myself talking about this group almost every year, but it's getting more. It's just getting thicker. It's getting deeper. It's getting more interesting. They've got some really interesting guys in this room now. Obviously, you've got Jack Doyle. Eric Ebron had a career year last year. They've got some other guys in there that I don't think a lot of people know about. Billy Brown, Hale Hentges, whoever the hell that is, out of Alabama. You probably know him a lot more than I do. Gabe Holmes, 4-year guy out of Purdue. Obviously, Ross Travis is a guy that a lot of people were talking about. And have for the past couple of years. Mo Alley-Cox is another guy. So let's kind of discuss these guys the way that they currently stand, because last year, and the reason I want to talk about Ross Travis is because he was one of those guys last year that everybody was kind of stoked about. Man, this guy's up and coming. I think he's going to really have a year. Well, he got hurt. So a couple things had to happen for Mo Alley-Cox to really actually get into the lineup. First of all, Ross Travis had to get hurt, and he did, or somebody had to get hurt. And then you had the thing with Eric Swope, where he was in and out, back and forth. Eric Ebron had to have, these things kind of all aligned to where Mo Alley-Cox got in there. Big boy, 6'5", 267. They love how his athleticism translates to the field. They love his catch radius, and so on and so forth. Today, Frank Reich talked about how he is significantly better and seeing, those little intricate pieces about his route running that he thinks is going to take him to the next level this year, or at least to his next level. This tight end room's fun, man. This tight end room's fun. It's going to be, I think they've got a lot of pieces. I think they've got a lot of interchangeable pieces, actually, outside that of, I would say Eric Ebron's pretty one-trick pony-ish, but I think the majority of the guys that they've got in there right now can kind of do both.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Mo Alley-Cox was rushed last year. He wasn't ready to play in an NFL game.
Right.
And you kind of saw like those first couple games, from the drops, from kind of rough route running, and even, his blocking stance and his blocking form was really not great for an overall player, but he's just so big and so strong. And they definitely liked what they saw. He didn't play college football. He played high school football, and then he played basketball at VCU. And I'm actually a VCU fan when it comes to college basketball. So it was cool seeing him end up on the Colts. But yeah, he's just a really big-bodied, strong guy, and they definitely saw that. And that's why he was able to even find success last year when he was kind of rushed into the process. I think this is his third year in the NFL going into this year. I think it's his third.
Yeah.
I might be wrong on that. So it's weird to say that he was rushed when he was, towards the end of his second year. You kind of threw him out there. But he was a major project. Mm-hmm. And now he's going to be thrust into maybe a tight end 3 role this year behind the top 2 dogs in Jack Doyle and Eric Ebron. And, there's going to be a lot riding on him to really develop his game and really take that next step. I really liked what I saw out of him last year. I do think there's a lot of room for improvement. But yeah, if he's improving his route running, if his hands are being more consistent and he can get a little bit lower when blocking, I mean, again, this guy has the strength, he has the size, he has everything to make an NFL tight end. So yeah, I mean, we saw some good flashes last year, and it's just really building on that and really developing and, getting a whole offseason where, instead of him being like a camp body or a practice squad guy, like he is expected to make this roster.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be a very big offseason for him. And I think they're going to spend a lot of good time with him. And I do love his potential in this offense.
I do too. He's the heaviest of all the tight ends, which
Yeah.
he's not quite the tallest. I mean, Doyle and Travis are both 6'6", but he's 6'5", so he's not. It's not like he's short. He's not like 6'2" or something and just massive. But they just love everything about him, and I'm interested to hear if you have anything on Brown, Hentges, Gabe Holmes, any of these guys present any sort of kind of a secondary option. I don't necessarily mean to fight for that third spot in the tight end group, but more along the lines of, do they add anything to where they could possibly make this team, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, the biggest thing to keep in mind is, last year the Colts kept 4 tight ends for a majority of the year.
Right.
Even when Doyle went down with injury, even when other guys were struggling with injuries as well, like Eric Swope was struggling with injuries a couple times. They always had 4 tight ends on the roster at all times. Whether it be Ryan Hewitt was up, Eric Swope was up, then Mo Alley Cox came up. Even who was that guy? Clive Walford, I think, was on the roster for 2 weeks. Yeah, so they always had their 4 tight ends, and I think that bodes really well for a guy like Ross Travis, who has the potential, can be that kind of receiving threat. And he's not going to be counted on to play every week. He could be that 4th tight end, and if a guy like Ebron goes down or if a guy like Doyle goes down, then he can find some playing time. But those other guys, Billy Brown, he's more of a receiving threat. I believe he's a receiver convert out of Ohio, if I remember correctly. I might be thinking of someone else. But that's just from my couple years of scouting here. I remember the name Billy Brown. Shepard. That's what it was. Yeah, but he was a receiver. He was a receiver converted to tight end. Big body guy, athletic. Just really hasn't panned out in that switch to tight end. I don't know too much about the Purdue guy, but the Alabama tight end, Hentges, how do you say his name? I know he's more of a blocking tight end. So say Travis doesn't really show receiving chops this offseason here, really struggles in this, come back from his injury. A guy like Hentges can be a guy who could step in, be that blocking tight end, kind of fill that Ryan Hewitt type role towards the end of the roster there. But yeah, I think it's mostly Ross Travis's job to lose as that 4th tight end. But yeah, one of these other guys could definitely take his spot. I wouldn't call him necessarily safe, but he definitely has the inside track.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting that Hentges, or like I said, whatever his name is, that he's one of the lighter. He and Travis are both the 2 lightest among the group. Obviously, that bodes well for Travis because he is a route runner. I mean, I don't know that we've seen enough of him in line to where we can say he's a solid blocker or not. I don't think he's bad, but he's definitely more of the receiving type threat. So, and that was kind of what I was wanting to allude to as we moved on. Kind of, does Ross Travis have a real threat to somebody beating him out for that number 4 spot? I don't know. Maybe we'll have to see. It's kind of hard. It's just really hard to tell. Like some of these guys, we just don't know how they're going to fit in the offense. That'll all come through, I think, in training camp. We'll decide all that, and hopefully everybody's healthy enough to kind of mess with it.
I mean, you hope that these guys play well enough to compete with him for that 4th. The goal is that, you hope that all these guys come out and they put up 10 touchdowns a game in the preseason, and you really have a tough competition on your hand there. We never know how it's going to go. Billy Brown and whatever the Purdue tight end name is in the league for 4 years, they've been around for a couple years here. So, they clearly haven't stuck where they've gone yet, but it doesn't mean that they're bad players. They might just not have found the right role for them. So, who knows? Maybe they come out and surprise, but I do think it's Ross Travis's job to lose that 4th tight end.
I would think so, and I would kind of hope so, just because I really want to see Travis succeed. He's just a fun guy to watch. So let's move on. Some more news. Bobby Okereke now remains to be the final Indianapolis Colts draft pick who has yet to sign. The Colts signed Rock Ya-Sin, cornerback, and wide receiver Paris Campbell today. I believe that was today. Was that today? Yes, that was today. So that's good. We almost got everything like that out of the way. Okereke being one of the guys that has gotten a lot of a lot of talk amongst the coaches and stuff. That kind of, I don't know that makes a difference at this point. We're still into OTAs, but you'd like to see a guy, especially a 3rd round guy. You like to see that kind of a guy already signed, in my opinion. What would you think is the holdup right now?
Yeah, I personally I don't put too much stock into it. Third round picks are usually the last ones to sign when it comes to these things because every draft pick is kind of slotted where
Mhm.
how much money they can make. I believe the biggest like discrepancy though is in that third round. So there's more kind of wiggle room, more negotiation when it comes to that.
Right.
That's why third round picks usually take the longest to sign. So
Good.
I'm not too worried. Darius Leonard was the last one to sign last year.
Mhm.
It just happens like this, especially linebackers. Like a biggest thing, Roquan Smith last year. The biggest reason why he was so late to sign is because the NFL put in a rule
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
you can get kicked out of a game and suspended for an illegal hit to the head.
Mhm.
In the rookie contracts, if you are suspended at all during a rookie contract, the team can completely void all the money in your
Wait,
contract.
wasn't that just a Chicago Bears thing? Weren't they the ones trying to put that forward? That wasn't an NFL thing, was it?
Maybe it is. I know that was the holdup with a guy like Roquan Smith. I'm not sure, but I know that linebackers are typically kind of later to sign with these things because of clauses like that and suspensions and loss of pay.
Yeah.
There's a lot that goes into linebackers. They play fast. They come downhill. Especially with the new helmet-to-helmet rules, there's a lot bigger chances for suspensions or loss of pay. So there's just so many little things to negotiate with a third-round pick with a linebacker. I'm not too worried about Bobby Okereke. I think he's already in camp. I believe. I think he'll be fine. They'll get him signed.
Right, and that is a good thing. I mean, nice to see him in camp. You want to make sure that they really just kind of have to watch their asses on this because they don't want to get in there and get hurt because then you're not guaranteed. But the way the Colts have been, the way that Jim Irsay, Chris Ballard, Frank Reich all are, if there was something of that sort to happen, you can bet that he's going to get that contract either way. So I mean, that's one of the things. Luke Schultheis, our own at Stampede Blue, wrote a nice piece on Ed Dodds being one of the top GM candidates going forward. You and I had a conversation about this, I want to say about a month and a half ago, and we talked about this. And this is one of the things I think that is exciting as so many pieces, whether you go to roster, you go to coaching makeup, you go to GM and staff, and all this that goes into making a team as successful as they are right now. This is one of the things that could fall apart. And I don't want to say it fall apart like it just disaster, but this is where you start losing big pieces in your process once guys start getting notarized or noticed. And Ed Dodds is a guy who's definitely getting noticed, especially after this draft. They did so much behind the scenes. People got a chance to see how critical I think that he is really to the whole process alongside Chris Ballard, and how intelligent it was for Chris Ballard to bring him into this mix. This is something that the Colts, unfortunately, are going to probably have to deal with over the next couple of years, losing little pieces and bits and pieces of their staff and their administrative staff at that going forward. So I don't want to ask, does it have an effect? Because of course it'll have an effect at some point. But this is kind of not something that I would say that the Colts have been known for in the past. Nobody's talking about trying to pick apart the Colts administrative staff because they're so damn good. That's not something that we've heard about in the past. This is something that's real right now.
Yeah, and one thing going to Dodds here. One thing that's good is Matt Miller from Bleacher Report came out with a scouting notebook about the Jets' vacant GM position, and he was throwing out top names. And one name that he talked about was Ed Dodds.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently, from sources he has heard, this is not anything from my perspective or anything. This is from what Matt Miller has heard. He said that the whispers around the league are that Dodds just has no interest in being a GM. He doesn't really want the decision making or all that. So he wants to kind of just have like the freedom to kind of do what he is doing now as an assistant GM. I don't know how accurate that is. Again, I'm not saying anything bad about Matt Miller here, but
Sure.
If that are the whispers, maybe Dodds will stay longer than we think. But regardless, you're going to see guys poach. Jamie Moore has proven to be an outstanding scout. When he with Darius Leonard, he kind of became a star.
Mm-hmm.
So, if somebody takes him for a director of scouting role or something like that, director of college scouting or anything going forward, that wouldn't shock me. And even on the the coaching side, like how much longer do we think Matt Eberflus is going to stick around here?
Yep.
Or even Nick Sirianni got a interview last year, I think, for a head coaching job. Like, these guys, when you find success like the Colts did last year, especially starting 1-5, making the playoffs, and then even winning a game in the playoffs, you're going to start losing coaches. You're going to start losing front office guys. But the great, a testament to being a great organization and something that Chris Ballard's talked about. You have to keep building. You can't just rely so much on one guy where if they go, it has to be a whole process, a whole team. And I have full confidence that they're going to be able to replace guys. I'm sure they have guys in mind for they think of every scenario, and they know like what guys they have to replace if they have to, or where guys could go. So I'm sure they have all this planned and all backups for all this. But hopefully guys get poached, because that means we're winning games. That means we're winning Super Bowls even, or anything like that. You hate to see guys get poached, but that's just the nature of the business. When you have success, teams want a piece of that success, and they'll start poaching from your team.
Absolutely. And obviously I think Ed Dodds would be kind of he seems to be kind of a really almost ideal running mate with Chris Ballard. So I think that would be probably for Chris, and probably for their entire draft process and how they go about doing what they do. That might be kind of a black eye, so to speak, in terms of, a guy who we have to replace. But I think one of the good things about the way the Colts are built right now is obviously your head coach is ultimately your your offensive coordinator and play caller. So you've got that. I think that right now, when you look, and even if Dodds was to get poached, you've still got Chris Ballard. So, I mean, you still have that. And obviously, he's got other guys that he would want to put into that role. And he has other guys that he feels are, aka rising stars, either around the league or within the organization. But you've also got a guy like Matt Eberflus, and we talked about this just a moment ago, but this is the one, in my opinion, that could hurt the worst if he was to, get himself a larger job, a more inclusive job. I don't know. It seems like a big step to take him into a head coaching role, but I think that he might. I mean, Indy's a small market, so I mean, even. And I'm just shooting out names here, not has nothing to do with who they currently have on staff at this position. But if he was to get a D coordinator spot, let's say, in Chicago, I mean, like I said, I'm talking about bigger markets. That's still somewhat of a boost for him in terms of his job. So I think those are possibilities. I don't see him personally getting a head coaching job yet, because we don't know enough about him, and I don't think the rest of the league does, quite honestly. That just is really quick. That's all that. But in general, I think that he could be, if he can put a back-to-back season, so to speak, and stack another really good coaching season on top of last year, he's going to be in demand. People are going to want him, and they're going to give him a crap load of money for it.
Yeah. And, I'm not saying I think he is the prime head coach candidate. I'm not saying I think he would be a great head coach right away either. But again, if he puts together like a top 10 defense this year, in Indy, like back-to-back really good years with a defense where a lot of people are saying didn't have that much talent,
right?
Turning Darius Leonard into an all-pro, stuff like that, teams will take notice. And I don't think that he would get poached even from a bigger market team. They would definitely try. I'm not saying they wouldn't try, but I think he's got a great situation here. He's got a lot of trust from the head coach and from the GM. He gets a lot of credit too, which is something that some organizations just don't do. They kind of give all the credit to head coaches, or GMs take the credit for themselves. Reich and Ballard are very selfless guys. They will they'll give great recommendations. They'll give credit when credit is due. But the other aspect of it, why I don't think another reason why I wouldn't leave. When you have a guy like Andrew Luck on the other side playing offense, you're always going to be competing for the playoffs. And you could be the best defense coordinator in the history of football. If you miss the playoffs every year with your team, it's hard to get those head coaching looks. Yeah. So he knows if he wants to be a head coach one day, which I'm sure he does because he did interview for that Browns job. Mm-hmm. He knows he needs to keep that defense up at a high level, and they need to win games. So, right. A guy like Andrew Luck on offense, guys like Frank Reich and Chris Ballard, doing what they're doing, Eberflus would know that to stay with Indy, is your best chance to eventually get the head coaching job, which, after 1 year with Indy, he got interviews already. So, I do see someday in the future he could be a head coach. I think he could even be a very good head coach because, he's learned from guys like Frank Reich. He's learned from guys like Chris Richard, Rob Marinelli, a lot of, some of the best defensive minds in football. He has learned alongside those guys or from those guys. I just think he's a really good coach. And right now, I think we just got to be really happy that we have him here in Indy because he was huge last year. My biggest thing I remember about him last season was I remember earlier in the year we were all complaining when they were 1-5, that the defense wasn't aggressive enough. They weren't blitzing.
Right.
And then it seemed like after that Jets game, he just kind of flipped the switch and he was calling exotic blitzes. Kenny Moore coming from the side on every single third down. Twists and stunts up front. You had Marcus Hunt dropping into zone coverage in that playoff game on that third and short to obstruct Watson's view. Just a lot of great little nuances and creativity from him. He was really vital in that turnaround late last year. So I think right now, the future, we don't know what's going to happen with him. He could definitely be poached for a head coaching job, or maybe he does go for a bigger market, even though I kind of doubt that. But right now, we just got to be really happy that we have a really good defense coordinator here in Indy.
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, if McDaniels ever gets bequeathed that New England Patriots head coaching job, that would be one to watch. But I don't know, man. I don't know that you go back to the guy that kind of left you in the crapper as you're trying to get your next, your first coordinator job. But real quick, touch on these. Ebron and Leonard, few days old here, had procedures. Doesn't look like they're going to be anything serious or out for any extended amount of time. Andrew Luck missed first day of OTAs. I believe it was a calf strain or something like that. Something simple. Doesn't sound, we're in OTAs. So, it's not that big a deal at this point. Kind of curious as to what the hell, probably just from training, I would assume. But other than that, very, very little on the news front in terms of actual happenings. The Colts did sign Chad Kelly after all. There was about a month ago or so, maybe not quite that long, soon after the draft. Sorry. They brought him in for a workout. Frank Reich did allude that he and Jim Kelly, obviously are close from their days in Buffalo, and that he had talked to him and, they had gone through this. Look, he's the fourth quarterback on the depth chart. I don't really see this being any big deal or anything like that, but I also don't see him making the team or anything.
No, and that's the big thing. A lot of people have been commenting on, tweets from Holder, like the Colts tweets and stuff like that, and all that stuff. People are saying, like, what about character issues that the Colts are so high on?
Right.
He's a fourth quarterback.
I think that's right for the lock. Personally, I don't understand the locker room aspect of it, why you bring a guy in like that. But yeah, to your point,
So there's two things. Is my two biggest things with this. One, he's a camp arm.
Right.
You bring him in not because you think, I think Philip Walker probably has a better chance of making this team than him right now.
Mm-hmm.
And Walker was barely even on the practice squad for half of last year. The thing with Chad Kelly, you bring him in because he has a good enough arm to get the ball to the receivers that you're trying to look at in the preseason.
Right.
You just needed a fourth quarterback just to throw the ball a little bit in the preseason.
Yeah.
So, from that point, it's really not that big a deal. And then going to the character aspect, Chris Ballard he has never said once that he's never going to bring in a guy with red flags. He's never once said that he's not going to bring in a guy with red flags. He said he wants to build a locker room good enough to where you can take in some red flags, and they can have that good locker room around them to kind of straighten them out. Kelly's not even an example of that, though, because he's really not even. He doesn't have a chance of making this team.
Right.
So that's not even an example of that either. He's just a camp arm. He's going to come in. He's just going to get the ball out to your guys like Penny Hart, Ashton Doolin. Even if Deion King gets some late one, Steve Ishmael, he's going to get the ball out to those guys. That's literally what his job is this offseason. He's not making the team. He'll be one of the first roster cuts. It's really not that big a deal. I know people are even using this as a Colin Kaepernick thing now. How Chad Kelly can get in the league, Kaepernick can't. Look, you think Kaepernick would want to be a camp arm?
Exactly.
Let's just leave it at again, Chad Kelly. There's a 90-man roster right now. He's man number 90 on this roster.
He and Kaepernick are not the same kind of situation whatsoever. That is not even comparable. Kaepernick wants to come in and be a starter. Chad Kelly just wants to be able to be in between the lines with a team through the summer. That's it.
Yeah, and you know what? I hope Kelly comes in, lights it up, and he makes a team. I hope so. But as of right now, he's got a lot to prove.
He's got a lot to prove, and this is kind of his opportunity to do that. So
he might get suspended. And what's funny? I don't even think the Colts even care about that because I don't think suspensions count for preseason. So if you're suspended, you can still play in the preseason. And that's all they
Yeah.
really are using him. So say he gets, suspended for this whole season, they'll still keep him just so he can throw the ball a little bit in preseason. Again, it's really not that big a deal. He's going to come in, he's going to get the ball out to your guys like Penny Hart, Ashton Doolin, and then he'll be cut. So it's not a big deal. It's not really something I would be, adding the Colts Twitter or getting mad about Chris Ballard for. It's not a big deal at all.
Right. And it's not like there's a lot of fourth guys on the depth chart out there that you would probably say had much better arm than Kelly does. He's got a really nice arm. So that is one of the things like that. Like I said, he's putting on a show to be able to see if he can't get his crap together, more or less. I mean, to put it blunt, about as simple as it gets. We're going to take a quick break here, guys. We're going to come right back with more with Zach Hicks. All right, guys, we are back. All right, Zach, let's talk about kind of what we're here to talk about today instead of 20 minutes of news for the Colts here. We're talking about Howard Mudd, talking about this Colts offensive line, talking about Strasser, talking about kind of everything in here with Googe going away at the end of this past year. Did a bang-up job with this Colts offensive line, and now he's not here. So we've got two new guys, but you have a legend in Howard Mudd. You've got a guy who has a lot of history and a ton of years, not necessarily NFL experience with Strasser, but you've got a lot of experience nonetheless of a guy running an offensive line. So tell us a little bit about how these two connect, kind of how they've got to pass together, and that's interesting. And then we'll talk a little bit about kind of technique and whatnot after that.
Yeah, no, 100%. And, I think the biggest thing about getting these guys, Googe is a fine coach. We saw last year, he got an offensive line that started two rookies in Quentin Nelson and Braden Smith, and basically a journeyman guy in Mark Lewinsky, and threw them all together, and they made a top 5 unit in the NFL. So Googe did a great job last year, but with Strasser and Mudd, you're getting guys who have 71 total years of coaching offensive line. Strasser had 28 years in college, 3 in the pros. And I believe Mudd's a legend. He's one of the founding fathers of offensive line play. He's been coaching offensive line since the NFL started, basically.
That's right.
These are two legends, in their own right. And you're bringing them in here to really develop this top 5 unit to be even better. But yeah, these two guys kind of go back a little bit. I did read a story. I don't want to take the credit for it because I didn't find this connection, but I did read a story that when Strasser was offered the job to be the offensive line coach here, Howard Mudd was actually his reference to Frank Reich. And then Reich, after getting that reference and hiring Strasser, went back to Ballard and said, hey, we got to bring Mudd back. And that's kind of how they both ended up here. They didn't even know the other one was coming here to the Colts. It just kind of worked that way. But when Strasser was offensive line coach at Washington, I believe in 2015, 2016, I think he was even up to 2017, they were working at Washington. Howard Mudd was actually living out there in Seattle. And Strasser, again, a veteran coach of 26, 27 years at this point, coaching offensive line, reached out to Howard Mudd for advice and to come and teach some of these guys. And I think that's a big testament to Strasser there. How many people who have been in a profession for over 20 years still want to learn, still want to develop their own techniques? And that's the biggest thing. He brought Howard Mudd in. Mudd actually worked individually with some of his players. And then they really built a good line there at Washington. And, the biggest thing I saw is Strasser really, took in a lot of Mudd's techniques, and you could see it on Broncos film last year when he was coaching the Broncos offensive line. Their film was their technique, however, was, the Mudd technique. It was Howard Mudd's technique on those offensive linemen. So it's really great to see that those two already have that chemistry. They already have that relationship. They kind of have the same thinking as well. So these offensive linemen for the Colts this year aren't going to get two separate, ideas with coaching. You're going to get the same kind of coaching, again, from two legends. So overall, Googe was a good coach. He's a fine coach. But when you can upgrade it into, a college legendary coach and all-time legendary coach in terms of football in general, you just have to do it.
Yeah.
So I think bringing these two guys in was a no-brainer. And I think, people keep asking me, it's like, how can they get much better? They're already a top 5 group. There were still some issues last year, and I think they can even clean that up. Luck might not even get hit this year. Who knows? But I mean,
lines vary drastically just between excuse me, from year to year. I mean, you'll see the best unit in the league, and they'll just go to crap the next year. I mean, this is not something that just is it's not a flat surface. This is definitely a circle. This is things where these guys have to continue to get better because the pass rush is getting better. Defensive coordinators are getting more innovative. This is not something that stays flat.
Yeah, no, especially for a team that started 2 rookies. Because the biggest thing that you kind of see in the NFL, is called the sophomore slump. A lot of rookies struggle their second year, and it's not because they got worse. It's because they have to adjust going their second year because there's so much film on them. So Braden Smith was really good last year, but he had some issues with his kick step. He had some issues with some technique. Coaches will be able to look at that film and exploit that and be like, okay, this is how we can beat him. So normally, if he didn't have guys like Howard Mudd and Chris Strasser coming in to coach him up, I would think that he would have a little bit of a down year going into year 2. But I'm more confident now with Mudd and Strasser as his coach here.
And so let's talk about, and if you guys aren't familiar with Mudd, and he's from back in the Peyton Manning days in the Indianapolis Colts, actually. I believe his last job was with the Cardinals. Is that right?
Eagles in 2012.
The Eagles. I thought he was with the Arizona Cardinals for some reason with Bruce Arians.
So he was with, I was listening, because in prep for my article that I wrote that came out last week, which we're going to talk about here in a second, I did listen to a bunch of podcasts that he was on. He was saying a lot about his resume. He was the Seattle offensive line coach when they had whoever Zorn or whoever it was as their quarterback. They had he's been around forever. In the 80s he coached the Cardinals, he coached the Seahawks. He coached the Chiefs, I think, offensive line at one point. Then he was, he's known for coaching the Colts offensive line from the early 2000s to the late 2000s or to like 2009. And then he took one last job with the Eagles before he retired.
So he came in as something though with the Cardinals. Was he not like an offensive line coach, more of just like a what Mathis was with the pass rush, kind of a whatever you. I can't even think of the word now.
He hasn't been officially with an NFL team since the Eagles, but he has had a consulting service since then. So that's how. So he's consulted. Like that's how him and Strasser kind of connected. He consulted with Strasser when he was living in Seattle around the Washington football team, and he's consulted for he's had scouts come into his home because he's a very inviting guy, very friendly guy. And he loves the game of football, so he never really left when he retired. So scouts would come in that he knew, coaches would come in, and he would give his consulting there. But he's been officially out of the NFL since 2012 when he was with the Eagles. Yeah,
there's a couple things here that I want to talk about. We touched on Braden Smith and kind of sophomore slump possibilities or whatever. Talk to us about kind of what you've seen and kind of the way that these guys are going to use their techniques, or where they're going to teach their techniques. Because I want to talk about Braden Smith with this, because I think this is something that's it's tangible going forward into this season.
Yeah. So the biggest thing, if you guys haven't read my article on Stampede Blue yet, I do recommend going over there, clicking on and reading it. I provided quotes in there, a lot of information in there about Howard Mudd and the Mudd technique. So if you guys don't know what the Mudd technique is, very simply, it's a very unique style of offensive line play. The first aspect that's really unique is, it doesn't have the normal kick step. So, when you watch offensive linemen, just watching games, you don't even have to have film. You'll see the offensive linemen kind of take 3 or 4 steps into the backfield as their kind of first step. Howard Mudd does not believe in that kind of retreating passive play style. So he doesn't believe in quote unquote the kick step. So a lot of football minds, even the greatest offensive line coaches in history, they love their kick step. But Howard Mudd hates it. He does not teach it. He wants his offensive linemen, especially his tackles, to be aggressive. His big philosophy is treat every single play like it's a play action. So on play actions, linemen are attacking because they got to sell the run. Well, he still wants his tackles and his linemen to do that. So for a guy like Braden Smith, which I touched on in my article with film analysis and everything in there, he struggled with his kick step. He struggled getting back because it's just something he's not used to doing. There was a lot of thinking involved with it because, again, it's not very natural. He played guard at Auburn, his whole career. So I think getting him into more of aggressive mindset, so where instead of he's thinking about where I got to step, how I got to step, what I got to do here, and then focus on my hands, you get him in a position where off that right side of the line, he initiates contact, he goes forward, hits that defensive end where he can use his brute strength and his athleticism to control him initially. I think that's going to be a more favorable position for him. So again, you're not really teaching him a technique that is kind of something that he was kind of built to struggle in. He fits the part as a tackle, but he just doesn't have that natural flow about him at that offensive tackle spot. So I think getting him that more aggressive set, the mud technique where he's flying out and hitting defensive ends at the line of scrimmage rather than kind of taking those 3 to 4 steps back and losing a lot of leverage. I think that's going to be a great situation for him, and I think that's a big reason why I'm really excited about this Howard Mudd, bringing Howard Mudd on.
Okay, so that's interesting. So I'm going to play devil's advocate then here, because it kind of makes me worried, being that he struggled with the speed rushers last year as opposed to the power guys. Power guys, he seemed to be able to handle them a little bit better, seemed to be able to get his footwork in place, I guess is maybe the way I'm looking to say this. But speed rushers really gave him a lot of trouble last year. So this makes me worry that he's not going to have the time. Unless, I don't know, because he is attacking. So he is getting, in theory, at least, he is getting first contact there in his pass set. But at the same time, he was so bad against speed rushers. It was noticeable. So when you take a guy, you kick him outside to tackle, he's in a second year, he struggled with speed rushers. You're going to force him to do more in a short range between, I'd say, the line of scrimmage and 2 yards deep, as opposed to 3 to 4 yards deep, where he was getting his drops or his sets and being able to at least be cognizant of where he wanted to go, when to show his hands, when to, do what he was doing. But this worries me a little bit in the same regard. As much as you're excited about it, it worries me for him because of where he's at in his career and kind of the new change in this. And I just don't know that I'm so sure that that's going to help him.
Yeah. So a couple things here. It's very interesting. So the kick step, in theory, is better suited to stop speed rushers. Because you're getting an angle on them initially.
Right.
I talked to, I think, 3 or 4 offensive tackles this draft season. One of them notably was Paul Adams out of Missouri. Very smart guy. And one thing I asked him was, how do you handle speed rushers differently from power rushers? And the biggest thing he said with speed rushers, is just getting that drop, knowing how to get your distance, how to get your drop, so you can cut off the angle there. The biggest thing with Howard Mudd, though, when it comes to these speed rushers, and why I think Braden Smith will fare better against them, is instead of making the angle, it's kind of hard to see. Instead of making the angle, drop backwards, right, and kind of cutting them off before they get that corner, your angle is literally at them. So the second that they are coming, your angle is cutting off their mode of attack there. And the biggest thing, I think this Howard Mudd technique is really going to work too with a guy like Andrew Luck and a guy like Frank Reich, because the offense is so predicated on getting the ball out quick.
Right.
It's a lot of those quick hitters. So if Braden Smith can attack and just get that first contact and just cut off the flow from those speed rushers, so they can't get ahead of steam. They can't really think about what their plan of attack is. They can't really set up their hands or anything like that. If you can get in front of them quickly, if you can make first contact with them quickly and really cut off their route, Luck's going to have that ball out quickly before they kind of know how to get off them. He did struggle with those speed rushers, but I think the biggest thing, at least when I was watching, the 2 biggest things at least, were his kick step was just slow. Because again, he just had to think a lot. It wasn't natural for him. The steps weren't natural. They were kind of short and choppy. Some reps he had a perfect kick step. Other ones he was taking 4 or 5 steps to get back there. And then as a result, the other big flaw was his hands were coming outside because he was so focused on his feet that his hands were coming outside and he was getting beat inside and getting pushed back by guys like, D Ford's 250-pound defensive end. He was pushing Braden Smith back into Andrew Luck in that game. And that doesn't make sense. A 250-pound guy should not be pushing around a 310, 320-pound dude like Braden Smith.
Right.
So I think getting in more of a natural point of view, a natural attacking mode. When you're a guard, you're always attacking. And he was a guard he was an all-pro, all-American, whatever it is in college, all-American guard at Auburn for years.
Mm-hmm.
He was drafted to be a guard, for instance. He has that guard mindset where he wants to attack. So getting him going forward, getting him cutting off the angles there, initiating the contact and just buying Andrew Luck's time and space that way, I think it's going to be a really good technique for him.
I was going to say, because now it would make sense to me that it would help in terms of this style of offensive line coaching as he's smashing down on a defensive tackle or something like that. I think that it'll be. I just feel like it's going to be quite a learning curve for him in terms of having to deal with the edge players. But
yeah,
it's been very interesting to watch. I'm actually really excited to watch this now that you brought it up.
Yeah, no, it's very fun too. Like, if you guys want to see any bit of how this kind of technique works, either watch Washington film from like 2015, 2016. Those linemen, they execute the mud technique so well. Watch that, or watch any of Strasser's games last year. The biggest thing I saw was a guy, Garrett Bowles, last year. He was a first-round pick for the Broncos a couple years ago. I watched his game against Myles Garrett, of all players. Myles Garrett is one of the best young pass rushers in the NFL. And at least for the first half, Garrett had no clue how to counter this physical brand of offensive tackle play, because you just never see it. It's very rare. Mud's very confident in how well this works too. He said he's had people do statistics, and that teams that do this technique give up notably less sacks than teams that don't. I wish I had the numbers on me. He said it on the Football Outsiders podcast a couple of years back. He's very confident in this technique, and the film doesn't lie. When I watch Garrett Bowles go against Myles Garrett, Garrett Bowles is not a top tier tackle in this league. He had a good year last year, but he shouldn't be handling a guy like Myles Garrett. And for the most part, he was able to give his quarterback enough time against a guy like Myles Garrett with this technique, because he was able to attack him, knock him out wide. It's going to be really interesting,
So where does that leave the vulnerabilities for this then? Because obviously the kick step, the vulnerability is the inside move or somebody with, a nice hand skill set. So where's the vulnerability in this attack mode?
Yeah, so obviously the vulnerability would be the inside move. If the speed rusher recognizes it quickly and he fights back inside. The other vulnerability is being over aggressive with your angle. So if you go too sharp of an angle at your defensive end, he can still beat you up the field, and he'll beat you much quicker and have a quicker line to the quarterback, which is always the word. You never want to give a quicker angle to the quarterback as a defensive end. Right. So it's all about angles. It's all about balance. And then the second part of the mud technique, the last part, the most important part, is doing whatever you can to get in front of your guy. So a lot of offensive line coaches say this, but they always want you to be square and be sound. Mud's very unique in the way he teaches this, where he doesn't care what you do as long as the quarterback is not getting hit. That's all he cares about. So the one phrase that he has coined in a lot of his offensive line clinics or whatever, the coaching clinics that he does, is called the ass block. It's called the ass block. And when he shows clips of this ass block, it's usually where an offensive lineman has to make an insanely hard block, maybe like a tackle on like a down, like on a stretch play. So say you have a stretch play going to the right, and the left tackle has to come down and block the 3-tech. You get the picture?
Mm-hmm.
So that's an insanely hard block. So he actually recommends in situations like this to do an ass block. Whereas instead of trying to get in front of that 3-tech, turning your body and getting your hands inside, he recommends his tackles to just slide in front and block with your ass and just get in front of the guy. And that's kind of the unique stuff that he just teaches. Even with pass blocking, if a guy's beating you inside because you overcommit on your outside physical or your outside aggressive pass set, he actually recommends a speed turn. So instead of trying to run back in, he says quickly spin around, just get in front of the guy. It's all about just getting in front of the guy, protect your quarterback. It's a very unique style. Again, it's very fascinating, especially for people who have studied offensive line play. But the two main components, again, is just being aggressive, having great angles, being balanced, and keeping your quarterback clean, in whatever way possible. If you're blocking with your ass, if you're spinning around and doing whatever, it just keeping your quarterback clean. And I think these guys are going to really pick up on it. Again, Mud's a legend. Strasser's a legend in his own right when it comes to college football. And these guys showed last year the ability to learn on the fly. Braden Smith went from an All-American guard in college to who never really played tackle to, first team all rookie, across the NFL as a tackle. So it's going to be interesting. There's a lot of really weird, unique things. I might not be explaining it perfectly well here on the podcast, but definitely go read my article there on Stampede Blue. It's called "The Mud Technique and How It Affects Braden Smith." A lot of cool clips in there, and a lot of like little coaching clinic things from Howard Mudd as well. But it's very interesting how he teaches this stuff.
So let's move on to kind of the rest of the offensive line now. Anthony Costanzo, he's a veteran in this league of several years. Is this going to affect him? Is this going to be like going from riding a tricycle to a motorcycle?
So again, I don't think this technique doesn't really. It's not really predicated on a change of technique or change of style, really. Like, okay, it's a change of style, but
just design of the play, more or less.
Exactly. Like, you're not learning 1 step, 2 step, 3 step. Like with a kick step. With this, it's more of, hey, do you know how you react on play actions? Do that every play. So a guy like Anthony Costanzo, who's been in the league forever, I'm sure he'll be welcome to something like this, because it's just a new way to attack these speed rushers. There's so many good rushers in the NFL nowadays. Even in the Colts' own division, you got guys like Clowney and Watt. You got not Fowler anymore, but Yannick Ngakoue, or whatever his name is for the Jaguars. Calais Campbell. The Titans are putting a couple guys up front. Harold Landry. There's some good rushers in this division alone. In the AFC too, and just general, there's a lot of good rushers. So being at 1 step ahead of the curve here, even though it's an older technique, because Mudd's been teaching it for 40 years, it's very unconventional. It's very, unique. But if it's something these guys haven't seen, these defenders haven't seen, and they're really taken back by it, you can really get an advantage over your opponents, and you can really, get an advantage just in these games. So I think just, a new way to attack these rushers. And I know a lot of people are going to be, complaining, why fix something that ain't broken? But, any chance to get better, any chance to really protect the quarterback, I think that these linemen are going to really embrace that.
Yeah, and I think that's the case. I mean, okay, so don't fix it if it isn't broken, but then again, you also kind of have to change looks. I mean, you don't just rush the same people and the same blitzes all the time if you're a defender or you're a defensive coordinator. You've got to mix things up a little bit, and that's ultimately what this sounds like it is.
Yeah, and here's the biggest thing too. I'm not proclaiming to be an expert on this. That's why I even reached out for the article. I reached out to my good buddy over at Cover One, Eric Turner. If you guys don't know the work at Cover One, it is top notch. It's must read every day for me. Everything that you could want to learn about scheme, film rooms, everything. So go over to Cover One. But Eric Turner, the biggest thing he told me, and the biggest thing that I got from listening to Howard Mudd on podcasts and interviews and stuff like that is, he believes in this, and if a legendary Hall of Fame offensive line coach who was your offensive line coach during the glory days of this franchise, firmly believes in this technique, and this technique has proven results, throughout his career, I'd be welcome to the change. If a legend wants to make a little change scheme wise to your offensive line play, and it's worked throughout his legendary career, I would have no problem with that. I'd fully believe him. And something he even said when he got to Indy, he had more kind of leeway when it comes to scouting and bringing in his guys and moving guys around, because, he's got that reputation. I think his reputation, again, speaks for himself. I definitely recommend reading up on it, though, because, again, I probably didn't explain it the best way without visuals or anything like that. But, yeah, again, if a legendary guy like him is touting his technique as the way to go, who am I to question that? I think that this is going to work really well here for the Colts.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to watch. I'm anxious to kind of see, especially once it gets into actual training camp, and I'm kind of curious to see as to how this goes. So looking at kind of the rest of the guys on here on the offensive line, strangely, I mean, I'm a little surprised that they still have Jamarcus Webb on the roster, but I don't think he was terrible enough to where it was a foregone conclusion he'd be gone. They've got some other guys in here. Jackson Barton, obviously Antonio Garcia, and Joe Haig's still around. They've got some other guys in there. But, I mean, when you look at Ryan Kelly, you look at Quentin Nelson, you look at kind of the group that kind of makes up the bulk of this offensive line. Mark Lewinsky as well, obviously. LaRaven Clark's still around. So they've got a lot of guys, and I think something that might get lost in all of this is that they really I think that they're definitely trying to. You see it more in the defense, right? You see it more trying to build athletic profiles in certain positions, but I really feel like they're trying to be as athletic as possible up front on the offensive line.
Hey, it's the NFL. Athletes are superior. You need athletes in today's NFL. And yeah, I mean, you saw it last year with guys like Braden Smith, Quentin Nelson. Ryan Kelly's a great athlete on his own right. They want athletes up front. Jackson Barton is a great athlete. I think he measured as an outstanding athlete. They definitely want that profile. And the biggest thing, especially when you have depth guys on offensive line, you want them to be athletes, especially when you believe in your coaches. I was just hyping on it for 10, 15 minutes there about how much I believe in these coaches. But, the Colts definitely believe in Strasser and Mudd. So if you can just get them a raw, athletic, player that they can just mold into what they want, into a good offensive lineman, I definitely believe that that's a good backup type player for them. So just depth and athleticism, like we talked about last time we had this podcast here about that on defense, just depth and athleticism all over the place. Well, offensive line, it's the same case. You want your like 2 or 3 safe guys, your Joe Higgs, your Evan Bames. Those are guys where say the projects aren't really panning out as fast as you need them to, and there's an injury. You can just plug a guy like Joe Haig in there anywhere. Like Joe Haig can literally play all 5 positions on the offensive line and play it well. Evan Bame can step in for Ryan Kelly and not really miss too much of a beat. You need guys like that, but for the most part, guys like LaRaven Clark, Jackson Barton, Javon Patterson, get those type of guys in there that you can really mold into what you want and mold into quality depth guys and maybe even quality starters down the line. But yeah, I just believe in the offensive line coaches, and yeah, I completely agree with them. You want athletes on the offensive line. You just have a better chance at molding an athlete into a good lineman than taking, a good lineman who's not a good athlete and making him a good NFL player.
Yeah, absolutely. And Larry Raven Clark, there was a video, I think it was last year, maybe the year before, about him jumping into a truck bed from the ground. Man, that dude's over 300 pounds. He's almost 315. That is impressive for a 6'5", 300 plus dude. So that is kind of what I think that's why he's still on the team specifically, because he is an athlete. But this is a fun group, and just looking from left to right with Costanzo, Nelson, Clark, or Kelly, and then Glowinski, and then Smith. Where do you? I mean, and I'm talking ballpark, man. I'm not gonna try to hold you to a number here. Where do you kind of rank this group amongst the rest of the league?
Well, I have to kind of stay a little bit on brand here, especially with me raving about Mudd and Strasser. Like, I can't be raving about them and then say they're going to regress from last year.
Sure.
But, wherever you think that you had them last year, say they were 5th in the NFL last year, even though they gave the least amount of sacks. There's always lines like the Steelers line has just some better players and stuff like that.
Right.
Honestly, the only lines I would definitively say are better than them are whatever line New England has, because their offensive line coach is, again, a legend as well. Wherever Mike Munchak is going, but it would be hard not to have them in the top 5. Again, you have a guy in Strasser who's been around forever, a guy in Howard Mudd who's been around forever, and then you have a group that gave up the least amount of sacks in the league last year, who propelled a running game to being really good last year when Mac was healthy. And you have an elite quarterback who knows how to get the ball out of his hands. I just think you're going to see a really good offensive line again. And it wouldn't shock me, if everyone stays healthy on the offensive line, if you get at least 2 Pro Bowlers in Nelson and Kelly, maybe even a third one, say Braden Smith steps up or Costanzo finally gets another Pro Bowl here. It wouldn't shock me if you get, 2 to 3 Pro Bowls on this offensive line, because, the Colts are going to be a good team. This line's going to only get better, and the way the offense is constructed, they definitely want to rely on the offensive line as a strength. So yeah, I would struggle to put them outside the top 5, just based off last year and based off going into this year with more weapons on offense and better coaching on the offensive line. It's going to be great to watch. They could definitely be the best line in football. It's definitely the ceiling for them.
Zach, this is excellent stuff. Always fun to have you on. I want one more thing from you, and I don't even know if you can answer this, but what can Howard Mudd, what can Strasser, and this offensive line talent, what can they do to break down or eliminate as much as possible so many batted balls at the line of scrimmage? What is their technique going to do to help that? Because that's a real issue, in my opinion. I'm going to continue hard. You guys can all roll your eyes at me if you like. or whatever. But I'm going to harp on this for a while because this is an issue. It was an issue for the Colts in the playoffs. It's an issue for Colts. You see the Colts going after guys defensively who can get their hands up into passing lanes, get off their feet a little bit, and that are long and lanky enough to do that. So it's a clear message from just NFL teams in general that that's what they want from some defensive line help. So what is the offensive line going to do to combat that?
Well, there's two things here. One is, batted balls are going to happen in this offense because
Of course.
they love using that middle of the field. The middle of the field is the gold mine there, especially when you have a guy like Paris Campbell, for instance, coming in.
Mm-hmm.
Give him that middle of the field, get him open into open space. So batted balls are going to happen. We saw in that divisional game, if you go against a guy like Chris Jones, who has
it was like 6-1 in that game, though. That's the
yeah,
problem.
no, 100%. I'm not disagreeing with you at all, and I'm actually glad you brought it up. The biggest thing from researching Mud, looking at a lot of his stuff, he's an old school ball coach. And you and I just knowing the game like we do, what do they always tell offensive linemen when it comes to defenders getting up and trying to bat balls? Punch them in the gut.
Right.
Punch them in the gut, get them on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
I would definitely be shocked if that's not one of Mud's first teaching points. He actually said on I think it was the podcast, the Football Outsiders podcast, when he was a guest on there. The biggest thing that he does when he first gets a job or first goes to a new team is he just spends hours and hours in the film room. So the second he got hired for the Colts, I guarantee he was on NFL Game Pass watching every single film he could on the whole Colts offensive line for the entire year. So I'm sure he saw the batted passes as well, and I'm sure that's a big coaching point right now is punch those guys in the gut when they get up there. That's definitely a big part. And another part is you got to tell your linemen on those plays, because a lot of those batted balls are quick passes over the middle. They're quick screens or quick passes, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And for a young offensive line, there are definitely times where I'm not going to say plays are taken off, but there's times where technique kind of fails off the young offensive linemen. Even guys like Ryan Kelly, who are going into their 4th, 5th year, where your technique is off when you don't really have to be blocking for too long on a play, especially on screen plays. Right. So I think Mud is kind of emphasizing like, hey, even on those plays, you have to do your job. You have to punch them in the gut. You have to get your good initial block, make sure they can't get off the ground. I think that'll be a big teaching point. So yeah, I doubt that that's not something they're going over right now, especially again with how much film Mud, and I'm sure Strasser does the same thing where they just watched probably every single snap of these guys last year. So yeah, I'm sure that's going to be a big teaching point. They're going to be telling their guys like, hey, you got to be technically sound every single play and punching these guys in the gut when they're trying to get up.
And it kind of makes me wonder because the defender, the defensive lineman, whether it's a pass rusher or just the interior defensive lineman, you notice what they're doing as soon as they back up a yard to kind of try to watch the quarterback's eyes. You know exactly what their plan is. So I'm kind of curious as to what, aside from just simply harping on maintain your engagement with the defensive lineman in terms of the offensive line, is there a technique that they're going to do? So I'm interested to watch that too, because I really think that's necessary. You see, occasionally you'll see offensive linemen who are just simply good at recognizing it. As soon as that guy intentionally loses engagement and is not going towards the quarterback, that it means you've got to do something to get that guy out of the play, one way or another. So I'm interested to see that. I think Andrew Luck, I wouldn't say suffers from a lot of them, but he does have a lot of batted passes. And I know he's not the only one, but he's the only one. I mean, he's the one that I noticed the most. And I'm sure that it's because it's the most that we watch, in general. But yeah, I'm really interested. There's a lot of aspects about this offensive line. I'm really very curious and kind of excited to see once summer gets fully into training camp and all this and that. We really get to see some of these coaching techniques and designs and philosophies kind of take mold. So I'm really excited for that myself.
Yeah, me too, man. Me too. I'm really excited, especially for when we see the first aggressive pass sets here in preseason. I'm sure people will be shocked, people who haven't listened or read along, because it's very different. Again, at least for the casual fans, seeing linemen attack like that on the tackles, it's very different. But yeah, I'm really excited for it. And I think guys like Costanzo and Smith and even the guards and center inside, I think that they're really going to pick up on this technique and really excel with it.
Absolutely. I hope so. I mean, I think we would all like to see that. Like you said, it'd be hard for us to say that they should take a step back. It would really be nice to see them take a step forward and not only improve the running game, but not only improve their pass protection, but to get a little bit more second level stuff and see some of these bigger runs kind of take place. We saw some of that last year. It'd be nice to see the second and third level yardage improve with the Colts in their running game specifically, in my opinion, and to kind of see some of these passing lanes open up a little bit. You know, guys not taking out defensive linemen completely out of the play. It'll be fun. I'm really excited for this year. This is a fun group. You can see the way that the roster is being built, and you can see kind of the workings of, you know, Chris Ballard and his brain and the guys that he has around him, as well as the coaching staff and so on and so forth. So it should be an excellent summer. It should be even a better season. We all hope, of course, but it's going to be a fun time, man. So, Zach, thank you again, man. I really appreciate you coming on. We're going to do this again, guys. I know that these have been spotty in this throughout the off season. I had vacation. I was gone for a week and a half. I had a couple of weeks before that where I had a crap ton of stuff going on. We're going to try to get you as many of these as we can, guys. We're going to get back into our schedule 3 to 4 a week, hopefully very soon. Hopefully we've got a lot more to talk about. You know, that doesn't hurt. So we're going to get into all this. We're going to talk more about the Colts rookie class, obviously, going forward, talk about the offense and defense as a whole, a little bit of philosophy here and there. We're going to try and get in touch on as much as possible as we go forward. So thank you guys all for listening, watching on YouTube. Zach, thank you again for coming on, man. Always great to have your brain here and have you explain kind of what you got going on up there, my man.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on, and thank you guys all for listening to you know, verbally talking about scheme is tough. You know, it's better to have that pen and paper, or at least have it on a computer screen there. But you know, it's very fun. You know, there's a lot of scheme. You know, I'm not the most in tune when it comes to scheme stuff. I like evaluating players better. But it's very interesting when you kind of mold that scheme in there and see how guys will fit with it. So yeah, definitely follow along on Stampy Blue with all my work here at Zach Hicks 2 on Twitter. You know, I'll talk some scheme on there, talk some Colts. It's a fun time this off season.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, we can get basics, and you know, you had a pretty good visual there with your hand.
Yeah, they come this way, and yeah, I'm gonna just pull up a diagram that just.
Everybody watching on YouTube right now is so much smarter because of that. That was
Yeah, the hand thing right there. It just took my descriptions to an A+. You
know? it was awesome. It was perfect. So thank you guys.
I'm gonna stand up and do it next time. I'm gonna stand up in the middle of the room and
yeah, please. We need you to tilt the camera and everything so that we can get a full on visual on this, so that it'd be a little more helpful for us. We need a second camera on your feet too. We gotta check.
My girlfriend. When we'll talk about like a cornerback scheme. I'll bring my girlfriend in. She can run routes against me. And technique.
I can dig it. I hope these guys can too, because it's gonna get we're gonna get crazy in here. So thank you guys all for listening and watching again. We'll talk to you guys next time right here on the Colts Cast.